All right, we are at the Pleasant Valley Lutheran Church, and we are standing right on the steps where Ceely Rose told Tracy Davis that she actually did indeed kill her family by using arsenic.
And right behind us as well is the cemetery where her parents and her brother are buried.
We were shocked to find out the church is actually still here.
Same church, same steps.
So, pretty crazy.
So she made her excuse and left soon after that, went home, told her father, and they went and told the prosecutor what Ceely had confessed to. Prosecutor said, okay, that's great. Now we've got to get you to get her to confess again, because we can't just go by what you say, because that's just hearsay.
Right.
So they have to have another witness. So her father says, I'll do it. If you can get her to talk again, I can be nearby listening and hear it all. So Tracy got Ceely into the barn on the farm where Ceely was staying and got her talking again. And this time, as Ceely was talking, Tracy's father was in the hayloft over top of them, listening and keeping track of what they were saying. So now they had their second witness, and they immediately arrested her after that. Took her to the jail in Mansfield, and that's when it became this huge news story. It went all over the country. It was carried by all the wire services, and people started coming to the jail to see her. That was back in the days when they kind of had open visitation for inmates, so anyone who was interested in Ceely Rose could come and talk with her. Yeah, so reporters by the boatload are coming in, talking with her, interviewing her. And although that's seems kind of sloppy by today's standards, it did give us some direct interview responses in some of the media at the time. Which is good for my purposes, researching it then all these years later.
I'm sure some of it was sensationalized.
Very sensationalized.
I'm sure you can tell. You could tell when you were reading stuff that was
we complain, and often with good reason, about the media today. But then again, over 100 years ago, it was far worse.
I was going to say, I'm sure it was very much sensationalized then, because that was their entertainment.
Right.
They didn't have the TV. They don't have the internet.
One of the reasons these interviews are so, you have to carefully weigh everything that you read in one of these interviews, because you can tell that the reporters asked leading questions, trying to get her to say particular things, try to get her to, make
which I'm sure in her mental state is very, very
right. She's very
incredibly
suggestible.
Easy to get her to say that.
Right. But nonetheless, a lot of good information in those things. They have the confession, the witnesses to the confession. They have the Marsh test. The prosecutor still knows this is not a great case, because there are a lot of people, the common response of most people who know Ceely Rose is they say, yeah, she's a little off. She's not quite all together. Well, for his purposes, to get the conviction of murder in the first degree, he has to prove that she is of sane mind, at least in a legal sense, which, isn't necessarily the same as a medical sense. He just has to prove that she knew that what she was doing was wrong. Well, the defense had no trouble finding a list a mile long of people who would say, yeah, Ceely Rose, she's never been right. She's out there. She's, and all those various horrible words, different people applied them to her. And the prosecutor did his best to find people who would say they thought, no, she's sane. She's sane enough to know that this was wrong. Well, the defense attorney was able to blow an irreparable hole into the prosecution's case when he simply asked one day, is it true that this witness, that witness, this witness, that witness, these are all relations of yours? He asked that to the prosecutor.
Oh no!
Yeah.
And they were.
Boom! They were.
Okay.
That's how much trouble he was having
I mean-
finding people who would say.
That back in those days, like everyone was related to each other, like some form of
Right,
way.
right,
Everyone
yeah,
was a
small
second
community.
cousin or
But smart
marriage.
as a defense attorney to like
Yeah.
to find that trail.
Yeah.
I think Gus Douglas, the prosecutor, I think he knew from the moment that case started that this was going to be a disaster, because he had to prove premeditated murder against someone who is obviously not all there mentally, and sure enough, it caused so much bad press and made him look so bad that he lost his reelection. It was basically the end of his political career, this whole case. And because, of course, the jury did find her not guilty by reason of insanity and sent her off to the state hospital system. She was initially sent to the state hospital in Toledo. She was transferred years later to the state hospital in Lima after it was built.
Which I also found that very interesting, because I've learned recently through another case that Lima was not the best, not the best place to be sent. It was like, if you were going there, it was basically to be forgotten.
In most cases, I'm sure that is true. Ceely Rose was an interesting case in her own right, though. If you go to the patient cemetery for the Lima State Hospital today, you'll see dozens and dozens and dozens of crosses on all these graves. Most of them are marked with just the patient number. There are only a few of them in that entire cemetery that have the patient's name on there. And Ceely Roses is one of them, which is interesting. The word that has come down to us from stories that have been shared in the Lima area is that Ceely actually had a sort of special position as a favorite of the
I was going to
staff.
ask if there was any information from the staff as far as how they...
Well, there's a whole interesting thing here that I have to tell you about. This is kind of an interesting thing. When I was back doing my original research, one of the thoughts that occurs to me is, okay, are there any surviving records from the state hospital system? So I contacted the State Department that was in charge of that now. And of course, the state hospitals in Ohio were all shut down years ago, and the modern style of trying to reintegrate people into society became the norm. But I wanted to see what records survived. Well, I got hold of someone, and I asked her, are there surviving records from the Lima State Hospital? And she said, well, the fact is, most records were simply not kept by the state. There are some that we have gathered, but the vast majority of those were not kept. And so it's unlikely that there's any information. So I said, oh, but there are some from the Lima State Hospital? She said, yes, there are some. So I said, so there could be information about Ceely Rose in
So
those.
you're not saying no.
And she said, well, it's theoretically possible, but it's unlikely. And I said, but you could do a search through those records to see if there's any information. She said, yes, but it's very unlikely.
Sounds like she's the one to do it.
I said, but you can search, right?
Do you understand what I'm asking?
So she finally said, yes, I can search. Give me the information. I gave it to her. And a few days later, I got a call back, and she said, this is amazing. I'm so surprised. I found something. Not a lot, but I did find a few records that refer to Ceely Rose. So I said, oh, that's great. Can I get copies of those? She said no.
Oh.
Because at that time there was a state law which said that information, even after all of this time, would only be released to the nearest living kin.
But it's like, I'm sure is... kind of annoying. Like, you know it's there.
Right,
That's
right.
You can't
That's
see
even
it.
worse than saying, "Hey, we don't have it."
Right.
Right.
You know it exists and you just can't see it.
But it wasn't a problem in this case. She said, I can only release that information to the nearest living kin. I said, fine, I'll have him give you a call. Because in my researching, I had found a man from southern Ohio who's descended from David Rose's sister. So by
Voila.
everything
Yeah.
I could find, he's the nearest living relative. So he called him up. They sent him the information. He immediately copied it back to me. And what we found is we found some amazing things. We got a copy of the page where she was first entered into the system. So it gave us, physical description and things like that, which was good info to have. And then, to our shock, we had a copy of the page where she was released from the asylum after 1 year. We know that Ceely Rose died in the state hospital system in 1934 after being in there for decades. But this record from late 1897
At one point, she
quite
was
clearly
out.
shows her as being released. But there is no readmission record. The only record after that is a year later. Oh, she gets a new suit of clothes. So it's like, what's going on with that? Well, of course, we're never going to be able to document what
Right.
happened there. But what we think happened in this situation, because we found a reference in the Mansfield newspaper from around that time about a rumor that Ceely Rose had been released from the hospital. And in that article, one of the attorneys in Mansfield says, they couldn't have released her. She's a ward of the state. It's our decision whether or not she should ever be released. They couldn't have released her. I'm sure we can clear this up with a simple telegram. There is an article then that says, yes, it was all a misunderstanding. She's still in the hospital. But that article did not come until something like 3 or 4 weeks later. It doesn't take that long to answer a question with a telegram. So what we think happened is that the prosecutor and the sheriff went down to southern Ohio, because if she was released, then it must have been to her surviving family. They probably went down to Pike County, Ohio, found Ceely with her relatives down there, and explained to them. And this was the one card that Prosecutor Gus Douglas had up his sleeve in this whole legal mess. When he put her on trial, he only put her on trial for the death of her father. Therefore, if somehow she gets free again, guess what? She has to go on trial for the death of her mother. And we go through this again, the death of her father. Or her brother. Then, the attempted murder
Right, I was
of
going to say,
George.
you could always go back on attempted
Right.
murder because
Yeah.
they have proof of
So
that
he
as
had
well.
basically gamed the system so that he could gum things up just to keep her off the streets for a very long period of time. So we think he presented that and said, she can either stay here and she goes on trial, or we can take her back to the state hospital and pretend this never happened. And voila, suddenly there she is in the state hospital again.
Which would make sense. Which honestly, it also might be in her best interest to,
Right,
be somewhere where they're just trying to help.
By all accounts, the staff never had any trouble with her. Once she was removed from that situation where things escalated out of control, she was an easy patient to deal with, and she became their favorite. She had extraordinary privileges, one of which was she was allowed to wear the locket that her mother had given her, which had pictures of her mother and father. It was actually her mother's engagement locket. And she was allowed to wear that on a little leather strap around her neck. Well, most mental patients wouldn't be given anything like that.
Right,
They
she
could
could
strangle themselves with it or someone else. But she was allowed that. So she had extraordinary privileges. There's also a story through families of people who had worked at the Lima State Hospital saying that, in fact, the staff had actually taken one of the facility's wagons, truck, and brought Ceely back down to visit her parents' graves in the late 1920s. So, of course, we're not going to find documentation of that anywhere,
Right.
but the story is
Right.
well known in certain circles.
You know, I think it's very interesting the statement you made about her being well liked among the staff, because I've noticed that seems to be a trend in other cases as well, with people that have committed, crimes, and then they get sent to a state hospital, is they always tend to be very popular
Right.
once
Yeah.
they get there, and then all struggles they were having seem to go away. It's like you're removed, like you said, you're removed from that stressful, everything that's triggering you
Yeah.
from that breaking point, and then it's just like the charismatic aspect that comes
Yeah.
out a lot of times with those kind of mental disorders.
And I think that's a great point to make, the charismatic aspect. We talked earlier about diagnosing Ceely,
Yeah, I was gonna
Ceely
ask you,
Rose's
what your-
issues. Well,
What are your thoughts
I
on
think,
it? Where,
first of all, I think the testimony of her teachers and other people make it very clear that on one hand she was developmentally disabled, but it's interesting if you look at these other descriptions of her, the glibness, the silliness, but the way that in a controlled situation she could be very well liked, very popular, very charming. So as an exercise, I took the 20 questions that are used to evaluate sociopaths. Now, of course, it's an intellectual exercise. It's a limited sort of thing because she's not alive. She can't be in the room with us to answer those questions. But it's a series of 20 questions about behavior with weighted scores. If it absolutely applies to this person, it gets 2 points. If it somewhat applies to this person, it gets 1 point. If it definitely is not this person, that's a 0. So the highest possible score on this test is 40 points. When they gave this test to Ted Bundy, he scored 39 out of 40. And these are the descriptors of a severe sociopath, or what is commonly known as a psychopath. Well, I decided as an intellectual exercise to go through and answer those questions as best I could
the way she would answer them.
regarding, Ceely.
with the information you have, which is
With the available information, which is admittedly limited, but nonetheless, going through and evaluating these 20 questions, I came up with an estimated score of 30 to 32 for Ceely Rose.
Wow.
yeah, I'd say that's still
which
pretty
moves
high,
her-
even as an
Yeah,
estimated.
that moves her
And being
officially
lenient,
into
I'm
what
sure.
is regarded as a psychopath. Sociopath is the term for anyone who has an inability or a severely restricted ability to understand things from another person's point of view. They lack empathy. So among sociopaths, psychopaths, what we call psychopaths, are the really severe cases. But then even among psychopaths, only a small percentage of those are actually violent. There are a lot of psychopaths who are functioning perfectly well in this world. Sometimes they're very successful in fields like business or politics. It's not necessarily mean they're going to be a dangerous or violent person. It's just a certain percentage of those who end up being the violent ones. Well, that leads me to a little side story. As you can imagine, I am just fascinated with various stories like this, true crime stories, just any kind of story that gives you insight to what makes some people click. Kind of stuff fascinates me.
So I'm like, true crime, I will sit and watch true crime.
Okay.
I'll be like, I'm gonna watch 1 or 2 episodes of this show, and next thing it's the end of the day, and I'm almost done with it.
Right. I completely get
Like, what
that.
just happened to my
Yeah.
Saturday?
It was like the day before I was going to receive the final proofs for the book for review and approval and go into the final phase of publication. And before I went to work one day, I was surfing around on genealogy websites, and one that had historical stories related to Appalachia was where I was searching. And I saw something about a murder case from Scioto County, Ohio. I thought, oh, okay, that looks interesting. I'll read that. And it took place in 1921. A fellow by the name of Roy Shamblin was arrested for having robbed a couple of people on the Scioto Turnpike, or at least he had stopped them with intent to rob them, but then shot them, basically executed them. And he tried to deny that. He claimed that he had just been walking along innocently and bumped into them, and a dispute happened, and they threw something at him, so
And
he
oops,
shot in
they're
self-defense. And yeah, oops, they're dead. As the sheriff is interviewing Roy Shamblin, he finds it remarkable that Roy doesn't care a bit about these people that he killed. You know, it's nothing to him. They're just chumps. So he has no empathy whatsoever for these people. So as the sheriff's questioning him and you know, trying to dig into him, he's thinking, wow, how can I get to this guy? So an idea finally hits him, because Shamblin had told him about, you know, his difficult childhood, and he'd gone to the boys' industrial school, and his mother was really poor, but, you know, his mother was really good to him, really loved to him, but, you know, couldn't take care of him very well. So he can tell there's some kind of connection between child and mother. So he says, Roy, what's your mother going to think when she finds out that you've been arrested for double homicide? And that gets to him, because he realizes, you know, his mother has been his one source of support throughout life, and if this devastates her, then he loses his support. So this really bothers him, and he says, you know, we have to be really careful about how we break this news to my mother. You know, if we shock her, it could cause her to have a heart attack or something. We gotta break this news to her somehow. Can you call in my uncle so I can talk with my uncle about how to break the news to his sister, my mother? And the sheriff says, okay, fine. What's his name? He said, his name is Ori Easter. Easter, which is not a common surname. Ceely Rose's mother was an Easter. And so I immediately start tearing through genealogical sources to see if there's some kind of connection. And I found it. Turns out Roy Shamblin, who ended up being convicted and was executed in Ohio's electric chair, was Ceely Rose's second cousin.
Which is odd to say, because a lot of stuff like that too is very, they say it's genetic.
Mm-hmm.
And it
You know,
can
if
get
you look,
passed down.
sociopath, psychopaths, violent psychopaths, here's 2 of them within 25 years in one family. That's really something.
So do you think that was solely her condition, or do you think there's something else alongside it?
I know that there is developmental disability, and then I think there's the condition of being a psychopath. But of course, one of the huge questions with that is, where does that come from? We've established there appears to be a genetic issue. Mm-hmm. There were also issues of mental instability on the Rose side of the family as well, which is documented. So there's a lot of mental instability running around there. And then you look at the fact that this is a poor family, so there are economic stresses involved there. But then additionally, there's a fascinating element that there was actually another sister. Her name was Julia. She was 2 years younger than Walter, so again, considerably older than Ceely. But she disappears from all records around the same time that the family suddenly moves from Pike County to Richland County. That's a move of over 150 miles, which is not something that was easily or casually done in those days. They moved from a place where their families had lived for a long time to a place where no one knew them. What's up with all of that? There's a lot of unanswered questions there. We don't have all the answers yet. We don't know where Julia was buried. We don't know exactly when she died. We don't know how she died. But it appears there is something going on there. Well, this has, opened the door to a lot of potential questions. What do we know about the dynamics here?
Does this maybe go deeper than...
Right, because it's been pointed out, okay, The Roses, they had a child named John who died in infancy, then Walter, then Julia, and then no child for a decade and a half, and suddenly Ceely? That's not impossible, but it's certainly odd.
That, I will say, when I was doing my research, that did strike me odd when they stated how old the couple was when they had her.
So the interesting point is, when Ceely was born, Julia would just have been getting to possible childbearing years. So, was Ceely actually David and Rebecca's child or grandchild? And if, by some possibility, Julia was actually the mother, who was the father? And do we really want to know?
Right, that was my question. Maybe is that part of the...
Right.
Which, if that's the case, that's where your developmental disabilities would come from, right there.
Right.
I mean,
So, the potential is there. Those whispers, could this have been incest or some sort of...
And if there's already a history of mental issues, that's more likely.
Right. So it just, becomes even that much more twisted and dysfunctional, all of which can contribute to a psychopathic condition.
I will say it was really interesting, as you're speaking of like where everybody's buried. It was really interesting to actually go. First, we're like walking through the cemetery looking, and there's so many people within the families. And then I see it out of the corner of my eye. I see the names, and I'm like, it's there. And we go over, and it's just very surreal to then look at the dates, knowing the story. Just look at the dates of the death, and you can see it's like it plays out.
Tracks, the berries, and the roses are all right there.
And then,
Guy Berry is just 60 feet away over here.
Right, and then you see this big tombstone. Obviously that wasn't originally there, that the names are on, but then you look down and it's like mother, father, and you can see actually where they're buried. It's very surreal to be like, that's their bodies are down there. And then we went to the house too, and the house was very creepy vibes all the way around. Well, you think
about how small that house was, and the section on the side, which is today the kitchen, that wasn't even there originally. That was added later. So you have this tiny house with 4 volatile people in it.
It
must have been like a pressure cooker.
Yeah, it's pretty small for a family.
And then also the stress of everything else, the lifestyle they had, and not really a whole lot. So
I will say too, being somebody that tends to be very empathetic, I was very much like when I was walking down, around the house, and we're just getting some footage. We're looking, we're just looking at everything, and it just got to the point where I was just like, I just started to feel worse and worse, and I have a point where I was just like, I have a really bad headache now on top of everything, and like, we gotta go. Let's just go look at the Berry's house. But I can see where people can walk into that house and have experiences there.
Right.
It's absolutely believable to me.
Every time
I wouldn't want to go in there just based on the feeling I got walking outside of it. I was like, there's no way I would want to go in this house.
Every single time that I've been in there, it's interesting. I find everything on the first floor to be, it just has kind of a heavy feeling, a sad feeling.
That's exactly how I described it. I would say it's heavy. I feel sad, not like not in a malicious way, just more of a very sad, heavy heart. We just kind of want to be left alone now.
But the interesting thing is then when I go upstairs to the room that we think was the area where Ceely slept, and interesting considering the original layout of the upstairs, there are only 2 rooms, so it means mom and dad in one, Ceely and Walter in the other.
Right, which makes you
uneasy
go revisit that because it happened once.
Right. Well, every time that I walk into that room, and I've been into the house many times, and I've never felt any different. Walking into that room, I feel like I'm walking into a field of electrical static. It's very different from the heavy, sad feeling downstairs. It's not a malicious or negative feeling. It's just a strong sense of presence, maybe a sense of curiosity, maybe a sense of confusion. It's like it's hard to think clearly because it's just static. It's like
just
noise.
there.
It's completely silent in the room, but somehow it feels noisy, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we know. We know exactly what you're talking about. Having to speak to people that have had experiences themselves.
Yeah.
I
That's
wouldn't
why
wanna
we started the
walk
whole
into
podcast.
We were both just like, we just have known each other so long, and it was just like, we both had just known this stuff about each other. And it was like, there's more people out here that have had these.
Right. Well, one time I took a group of people on a tour into the house. We hadn't even made it up the stairs before we were just starting to go up the stairs when one woman turns around and starts pushing people out of her way and said, I have to get out of this house right now or I'm going to throw up. And
I
she
feel
ran
like
outside.
that's what would happen.
Dude,
to
that's
me.
kind of like the feeling I had. Like I was like, we're like walking around the grounds and we're like in the back of the house, and I was like, dude, I'm feeling like really bad.
Yeah, that's how mine started. I
Right.
felt bad. I felt like my hands got just really weak, and I started to feel like that, and then it just turned into like, not like a headache you get when you have like a cold or your sinuses. It was just like this sharp pain, and I was like, I gotta go. Like,
We were both like really happy to like leave the area. So like, so we're talking like, let's go to Barry's house. Like, it looks.
that looks nice over there. Looks like they're doing some kind of basket weaving or something over there. Let's go.
Yeah,
there.
the spinning and weaving
Yeah,
guild is
that's,
set up in there now.
that's what it was. There was
Now,
some,
before that, from 2010 to 2018, I actually lived in that house, the Berry house.
oh, did you?
It was operated as a hostel at that time. So I was the manager there. So it was nice being able to actually live there at Malabar for
like
a while.
The little child in you that was interested in that's just like,
yeah. Although I would point out that although it's a very pleasant, nice place, the Berry house does have a couple ghosts itself.
that wouldn't surprise
super,
me.
yeah.
With everything being
One of the few full apparition ghosts I've ever seen
Really?
was in that house.
was in that house.
Do you
the
have
funny-
an idea of who you thought it was, or were you just like, I don't
haven't-
know?
We haven't been able to identify who it is, but I'm not the only person who has seen her. It's a little girl. The funny thing is, I was recommended for that job by the previous manager, who was a friend of mine. We had done some research together on various projects. Brett Mitchell is his name. And when he suggested the place to me, I was really interested in taking over as manager. And I just asked for his assurance before I moved in there. I said, it's not like a crazy, nasty haunted place or anything like that, is it? And he
Just a
said,
regular
no.
haunted place.
He said, he just said, it's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine. That should have been
Fine.
like your red flag. It's
Right.
fine. What does fine mean?
So, and so I move in there, and it's like
It's fine.
the first. It's within a week of when I've moved in there. One of the first times I'm taking laundry from the sleeping rooms upstairs. I'm going down the stairs to the basement, and as I'm turning around on the landing, out of the corner of my eye, see a little girl run across the front hall, and then she's gone. So I'm like, okay, well, that was interesting. So I emailed Brett and I said, so have you ever seen
does finding
anything
a little
while
girl-
you're here? Now, Brett is notorious for taking anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months to respond to an email. He's terrible about replying. This time I got an email 5 minutes later, and all it said was, so you saw her too. I saw her a couple other times after that, but the full apparition time was one time when I was cleaning, was getting the place ready for guests who were coming in. So the last thing on my mind is anything like hauntings or ghosts or anything.
Right.
I'm thinking about my laundry list, things I've got. I got to sweep, I got to mop, this, that, and the other. I had just done something in the dining room, and I turned the corner in the hallway to head out to the living room out front. And just for the quickest flash of a second, saw this little girl, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years old, in an old-fashioned dress with lots of frills and everything, running down the hall at me with her arms out, like she was going to jump into my arms. And of course, in the next half second, my brain thinks, I can't be seeing this, and she disappears. But then I got this incredible incredible warm and cold feeling at the same time. So I think I got hugged by
I
a
was gonna
ghost.
say, that's kind of. Do you ever feel like
amazing,
that you maybe you doing all the research and having all the knowledge you have about that place in general has maybe like connected you there, and maybe that's why that happened to you, you experienced that so easily with her?
Well, I've had more than one person who would describe themselves as, a sensitive or, empathetic or such, say that they get the impression that at times Ceely Rose actually follows me around and kind of keeps tabs on what I'm doing.
I'm sure
with
you're
this you're
telling
story.
everything right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, make of that what you will. I did once see or thought I saw, however you want to look at it, but a full apparition of Ceely. And
How was that? Like, I'm sure that was a lot of mixed emotions for you. Like,
especially because I first saw her, and she's maybe like 40 feet away from me. I see her, she's smiling, and in the next instant, because I've seen her and recognized it's her, suddenly she's only 20 feet away from me. And that's when the brain kicks in, like, whoa, can't be seeing this.
right. And I've heard too that that it always feeds off of your body reacting. So once you set your body into that, that's why you stop seeing things, is because you're into that physical state. And then
I'm just happy to hear an actual happy ghost story on this show for the first time.
Yeah, this is like, probably the only.
Every story we have is like absolutely nightmare
people
fuel.
terrified.
It's kind of nice to hear about like a
they're
little
not
child.
terrifying, they're very weird and unusual.
Yeah, there can be different.
Most
kinds
of the stories
of
we get are like absolutely just terrifying. So it's really nice to hear about one where little girl's like, "Hey, hi."
Right.
Hello, I just want to hug you. So as far as with you writing the book and everything, I know that you kind of expressed that you wanted to do that separate of a paranormal thing because you thought that this was important information that needed to get out there, which I completely agree from, all the information that you're giving us, a lot of which we didn't know. But do you ever feel like, especially within the process of, releasing the book, that the paranormal aspect, everybody being attracted to this location because there's supposedly ghosts here and they want to find those ghosts, overshadows the story, like people come in and they don't get all the knowledge?
Right. That very much is the case, because a lot of people come in with only the vaguest notion of what the story is about, and then they want to imprint this idea on the case. She killed her family, therefore she must be evil. Ooh, this must be some nasty, evil ghost, and we want to find evidence of that. Well, that's not the case. This is the case of a young woman who was so mentally messed up. Yes, she killed her family, parts of them at least her mother. I don't think she ever stopped loving. Yes, she killed her, but it's not like she hated her or was evil. She just saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, so she's going to get them out of the way. Did she truly understand that she was erasing them from the face of the earth? No, I don't think so.
Think she did either.
She talked later on about how her mother would talk to her in dreams. So to her mother's still out there somewhere. She doesn't really understand why her mother doesn't come back to her, but she still talks to her once in a while. So, she's still out there.
You talked about in the book, like she'd pass by the graveside and she would have no emotion whatsoever. Just saw the graves, like it was like I'm looking at a stone.
Like a stone with their names on it.
Not even like realizing what that actually is.
Yeah. So I think there was very much a disconnect like that. Now, of course, the funny thing is some people with this insistence that they want to label Ceely Rose evil have then said that I try to make her seem likable or something like that. It's like, no, I'm just trying to make sure that people recognize the real facts of this case. So many people run through life wanting everything to either be black or white. Well, guess what? Life is a rhapsody in gray, and Ceely Rose is a perfect example.
Yes, and I would say, a lot of things that you mentioned earlier, on, as well as far as her mental state and her being able to, like, I guess the best example that I was like, this is an actual truth when you're talking about having the mind of a child, but also dealing with the emotions of being a full-grown woman is, we deal with that at my house. My stepdaughter has special needs, and she's 21 years old now, and it's like exact that thing. It's like you see it in front of you, her trying to cope with all these emotions as a woman, but she only has the mind of like a 5-year-old to be able to do it, and it's like she gets frustrated and she gets upset, and that's exactly, I think, speaks truth to what you're saying about things being gray. Like it's not black and white. There's a lot of things in there, and some people it's easy for them to just go straight through life because they don't hit those walls or see those things, but most of us, other people out there in the world, we experience those things, and we know that the gray is there. And
so I think telling the history of it is
it's
a
important.
way of drawing attention.
And I
to
definitely
that.
agree with you there that I don't think she's evil. I think it's very much of a situation. Had it happened this day and age, in our modern times, it would have been handled much differently.
That's one of the things that I tried to think about with this case, how it would be handled differently. Part of what scares me is, in some ways, I'm not sure that maybe we might even handle parts of the case worse.
That's true.
Because at least
publicity with the way media is today, it probably...
Well, at least one thing they got right, I think, was that they found her not guilty by reason of insanity.
And let's put her somewhere.
And I'm not entirely sure every jury would do that today.
That's true. That is a hard thing these
Which
days
is a scary
to
thought.
use.
But they would have to first figure out if she's even right to stand trial.
Right.
Which she probably wouldn't even pass that. Hopefully, you'd think, with someone like that.
Well, it's scary too, because I feel like a lot of times too, they know what the outcome is they want to get. Like I recently was watching a thing, and there was an individual who had multiple personalities. So when the court asked them to approach for the court date to figure out if the person could stand trial or not, they didn't say, are they insane or are they sane? The question said, at the time of the crime, did they know the difference between right and wrong? So they knew that this person had multiple personalities, and they just wanted to know, did that personality know? Because if that personality knew, that's all we care about.
Right.
And I think in that aspect, you're right. It's they sometimes they know the outcome they want, and that's what they're going to go after.
Right.
The book is called The Ceely Rose Murders at Malabar Farm. It's written by our guest, Mark Sebastian Jordan. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
My pleasure.
No, it's been amazing. I've loved hearing the story.
Yeah, I've loved it. I feel like I should be like sitting in front of a fireplace with like some hot cocoa.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely amazing to hear the stories and your experiences. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you next time on Spooky Door.